My name is Charlotte. I'm 32 years old, an artist living in New York. That night, exactly at 3 a.m., I received a call from my dad. Charlotte, the building you're in is on fire. Hope you have insurance. But instead of panicking, I laughed. A laugh that left him speechless, and I too felt a lump in my throat. Because that fire didn't just destroy the only apartment I had, it also ignited a terrible truth behind it. A plot my entire family had never imagined. Have you ever been in a situation where you thought you'd lost everything, only to realize that moment opened a door to a much bigger truth? Leave a comment to tell me about a shock that changed your life. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to follow me on this journey. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio where everyone knew each other and most young people's dreams stopped at getting a stable job, buying a small house with a white picket fence, and living close to their parents to take care of them in their old age. My dad, Richard, was a head accountant. For him, life was measured in numbers, spreadsheets, profits, and financial security. He believed all risks could be avoided if people made the right calculations. My dad wasn't cruel, but he was extremely rigid. A decision only had two answers: beneficial or not beneficial. He never cared for things like passion, inspiration, or dreams. My mom, Linda, was much gentler. But she usually stood by Dad, rarely opposing him. She used to tell me, "Charlotte, sometimes it's easier to go along." I didn't fully understand this when I was young, but eventually, I realized it meant my mom chose silence instead of opposing my dad's decisiveness. In my parents' eyes, my older brother, Mark, was the shining pride. He was the high school football star, known all over town. When adults in the area met me, they would smile and ask, "You're Mark's little sister, right? Did you see the game last night? That boy is amazing." I was used to the name Charlotte, only existing as a shadow behind the hero Mark. Mark was always encouraged and given the best of everything: expensive sneakers, a private coach, even a brand new pickup truck when he went to college. I, on the other hand, loved drawing since I was too young to write. On evenings when the whole family gathered in the living room to watch Mark's game, I'd be at the corner of the dining table, pencil and scrap paper in hand, sketching. I drew faces of people in the town, the neighbor's cat, the wheat field behind the house in the sunset. The day I showed my dad my first drawing that I was proud of, a portrait of him sitting at his desk with a stack of papers taller than him, he just glanced at it and said, "Yeah. But Charlotte, what do you plan to do with this? Art doesn't pay the electric bill." That comment was like a knife. I was only 12 years old. But in high school I had an ally. My art teacher, Mrs. Ellis, was the first to tell me I had real talent. She patiently guided me, helped me find materials, and when she saw I craved more, she gave me brochures about art schools in New York. I remember one autumn afternoon when I secretly hid the pile of materials under my pillow. Dad found them by chance and sneered, "You think you'll live by painting on fabric? Look around, is there a single artist in this town? You're not special. You need an accounting degree, or at least a teaching degree, to have a decent job." Mom remained beside him, quiet, her gaze pitying as it rested on me. But deep down, I knew I couldn't live the life someone else mapped out for me. I didn't want to wake up one day, look around, and find myself stuck in a tiny office, buried in numbers that meant nothing to me. I wanted to hold a paintbrush. I wanted the ideas in my head to have shapes, colors, life. In my senior year of high school, I got a letter saying I had been accepted into an art program in New York with a partial scholarship. I remember the moment I opened the envelope, my heart raced and my hands trembled. I hugged the letter, thinking that at least this time, I would hear congratulations from Dad. But no. He read through it and placed the letter down on the table, his voice firm. "No. You're not going. New York isn't for you. Art doesn't feed anyone, Charlotte. You'll go to state college, get an accounting degree. Later, you'll thank me for not letting you waste your youth." I had never raised my voice to my dad, but that day I cried and said, "You've never seen me as my own person. I'm not Mark's shadow. I don't want to live a life where every day is the same just to keep you happy." He coldly, "Emotions don't pay rent. When you understand that, you'll be grown up." I quietly stepped away from dinner that night and locked myself in my room. That night, for the first time in my life, I felt completely alone in the house I was born in. I worked part-time at the small-town cafe, saving every penny. On the last night before I left Ohio, I looked around the small room with paintings covering the walls. Mom walked in holding an old suitcase. She set it down and whispered, "Charlotte, I can't stop you. Dad will be furious, but I believe, at least you need to try. Otherwise, you'll regret it your whole life. She handed me a small card tucked inside the suitcase. Later, I found out it was a savings fund she had secretly put aside for me. The next morning, Dad refused to drive me to the bus station. He sat in his office pretending not to notice. Mark patted me on the shoulder, half teasing, half serious. You'll be back in a few months. New York isn't for dreamers like you. I gripped the suitcase tightly, looking him in the eye. We'll see who's really the dreamer. The bus left town at dawn, leaving behind familiar small roads, neighbors waving and Dad's disdain. I knew the road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in my life I felt like I was walking on my own 2 feet. The day I arrived in New York, I thought I was stepping into a dream painted with bright lights and towering buildings. But just a few weeks later, I realized the price of that dream wasn't light. I rented a spot in a makeshift student dorm, really a cramped room with 4 people squeezing in. The old bunk beds creaked every time we turned over. By day, I attended classes, and by night, I washed dishes at an Italian restaurant. On weekends, I worked at a small cafe. I barely had time to paint. Tuition, rent, food, everything in this city was more expensive than anything I'd ever known in Ohio. Many nights, I returned to the dorm so tired I forgot to take off my shoes, curling up on the bed, still hearing Dad's words in my head. Art doesn't feed anyone. I lived on instant noodles, cheap sandwiches, and watered-down coffee. Once, when I checked my expenses, I realized I had lived the whole week on $20. But strangely, no matter how tough it got, I felt a bright spark in me every time I picked up a pencil to draw. After 2 years of struggling, I found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. Saying apartment sounds fancy, but it was actually a 6-story building in disrepair, with peeling brick walls and iron stairs that clanged loudly when anyone walked on them. The landlord was an old Mexican man named Mr. Vasquez, thin with a gray beard, always wearing a worn hat. He rarely made repairs but never raised the rent either. And to me that was a huge blessing. The room I rented was a tiny bedroom with a warped wooden floor, a north-facing window letting in cold but steady light. That strange light turned out to be perfect for painting. I set up an easel by the window, and that became the place where I spent hours painting, forgetting about the city's noise. In the years that followed, the building and its residents became my second family. There was Nina, a young nurse who would come home before dawn. Every time I caught a cold from overworking or got sick in the winter, she'd knock on my door, offering a hot soup. "Eat, Charlotte, or I'll call 911, she would joke. I'd laugh. "If you had a sister, I bet you'd want her to be like me." Nina would smile, her eyes dark from lack of sleep but filled with warmth. Then there was Walter, a retired high school teacher with white hair, living downstairs. He had a habit of playing jazz music loud on Sunday mornings, making the whole building hear it. But strangely, no one complained. He had a rare vinyl record collection, and every time I stopped by, he eagerly introduced me to new pieces. "Listen to this saxophone solo, little one, it's like it's speaking to us." We sat together for hours. I sketched his face while he closed his eyes, swaying to the music. On the ground floor was the Patel family, who owned a small grocery store 2 blocks away. They always reserved the best fruits and freshest vegetables for the residents of the building. Every time I stopped by, Mrs. Patel would sneak a few extra apples into my bag, saying, "Girls away from home need to eat well to stay strong for work." I smiled, feeling like I had a second family in this foreign city. In that old apartment, where the windows shook whenever trucks passed by, where the hallway always smelled of boiled cabbage from the 3rd-floor apartment, I found something Ohio had never given me: freedom. I could stay up until 3 a.m. painting without anyone scolding me, hang paintings all over the walls without being called a waste of time. Despite the hardships, I began making small progress in my career. At first, it was just a few small exhibitions in coffee shops, community galleries. I got used to receiving countless rejection emails from big galleries. But I persisted. I remember one time when Nina visited, looked at the paintings stacked in the corner of the room and sighed, "Don't you get tired? How many rejections and you're still not giving up?" I smiled, wiping the paint off my hands. "Of course I get tired. But if I don't paint, I don't know how I'd live. Maybe painting is the way I breathe." In my 8th year in New York, the miracle finally happened. A small but well-known gallery in Chelsea contacted me. The manager, Sophia Miller, said she had seen my paintings at a group exhibition and wanted to give me a solo show. I remember my voice trembling when I called Nina. Nina. They want my paintings. They really do. On the other end of the line, Nina screamed so loudly I had to move the phone away. The exhibition was scheduled to open in 2 weeks, and I poured all my energy into completing the largest paintings. During those days, I nearly lived on the smell of oil paint, with my hands always covered in it, clothes stained with color. But I didn't feel tired because, for the first time in many years, I felt like I was standing in front of the real door to my dream. On the fateful evening, I decided to bring all my paintings to the Chelsea Gallery to prepare in advance. I worked late and Sophia looked at me worriedly. "Charlotte, you're exhausted. Stay in the office tonight, go home tomorrow." I nodded, not knowing that this seemingly small decision would save my life and open an entirely different chapter for me. In the final months before the fire, the building where I lived seemed to turn into an old, sick body, each day revealing signs that it was about to collapse. The pipes on the 4th floor suddenly burst, flooding the hallway and turning the whole building into a wet maze. Water rushed, tapping on the warped wooden floors. Residents panicked, running with buckets, shouting. Old Walter, with his white hair, shakily leaned against the railing, panting, "I've never seen a pipe burst this badly. It's been decades since something like this happened." Nina and I grabbed towels and rags to block the leaks. The whole building was engulfed in the smell of mildew, as if some invisible hand was intentionally breaking every little thing to make this place unlivable. Before I could even recover, a few weeks later, the basement circuit breaker started smoking. The smell of burning plastic spread through the hallway. That time, luckily, the fire department arrived in time to prevent the fire from spreading. But everyone's eyes carried a lingering fear. What if one day they didn't arrive in time? I began to pay more attention. The back door, which had always been locked tight, was now frequently left open. Many nights when I came back from work, I'd hear the cold wind blowing through, the iron door banging in the darkness. I and a few residents reported this to Mr. He listened, mumbling, "Yeah, I'll send someone to check." But no one ever came. His attitude was completely different from before. No longer the usual apathetic indifference, but more like avoidance, even fear. Then one afternoon, I saw strange men appear in the building. They were dressed in sharp suits, holding clipboards with shiny shoes, not like maintenance staff at all. They walked together, whispering, knocking on a few doors, but no one was given a clear explanation. I approached and asked, "Excuse me, who are you? What's going on?" One man smiled faintly, "Just a routine check, don't worry." His smile made my spine tingle. What routine check? Didn't have paperwork or prior notice. But when I turned to walk away, I caught a glimpse of them looking at each other, like they had achieved some goal. As the building became more unstable, my career unexpectedly flourished. The exhibition at Chelsea had been scheduled, and I threw myself into working, forgetting to eat and sleep. 2 weeks before the opening, I decided to bring all my paintings to the gallery to prepare. That night, I was exhausted, collapsed on the couch in Sophia's office. She insisted, "Charlotte, stay here tonight. You can't bring those paintings back home in this condition." I agreed. And that decision saved my career, maybe even my life. At 3 a.m., the phone rang loudly, tearing through my restless sleep. I rubbed my eyes, looked at the bright screen. Dad was calling. His voice was frantic as it came through the speaker. "Charlotte, your building is on fire. They're broadcasting live on TV. Are you there?" I froze, half awake, then stopped. "The house. My building. Fire." Before I could respond, he continued, his voice trembling. "You're not hearing me wrong. The fire started on the 3rd floor. It's spreading fast. Did you get insurance?" A laugh erupted from my chest, so sudden that I surprised myself. It wasn't a laugh of joy, nor a mocking laugh. It was a choking laugh, tinged with bitterness, echoing in the dark. Dad fell silent. "Charlotte, why are you laughing? You're about to lose everything." I responded in breathless gasps. "Dad, I'm not there anymore. And my paintings, the most valuable thing, are safe. So, maybe I haven't lost anything." I knew Dad couldn't understand how I could remain so calm. But how could I explain to him that what I had just heard was clear evidence of the fears that had been brewing for months? I immediately called Nina. No one answered. I called Walter, then the Patel family. No response. My heart raced. I quickly called a cab and rushed out into the street, still in clothes stained with paint. When the car stopped a block away from the building, the sight before me took my breath away. The red fire licked the night sky, black smoke billowing as if it wanted to swallow the whole block. The wailing sirens, the shouting, the flashing red and blue lights cast across the walls. I pushed through the crowd, my eyes scanning familiar faces. Walter was sitting on the doorstep, wrapped in a rescue blanket, his face covered in ash. When he saw me, he burst into tears. "Charlotte, we thought you were still inside." I rushed over, grabbed his hand, the heat from his skin still radiating. I urgently asked, "Is anyone still inside? Where's Nina? Where's the Patel family?" He pointed to the distance. "Patel's over there, they made it out. Nina's on the night shift, so she wasn't home. But there are still a few people unaccounted for." We held our breath as we watched the fire department rush in. Every minute felt like an hour. The fear tore through my chest, but at the same time a sense of irony surged. All these years, Dad had always reminded me to get insurance, afraid I'd lose everything due to poverty. But in this moment, the only thing I thought about was the people around me. And ironically, all my paintings, the culmination of years of hard work, had been moved out the night before. The fire consumed my material past, but left me with a clear realization. Not everything can be measured by money or insurance. What remains in the heart, the neighborly bonds, the faces, and the untold stories, was what made me laugh in the midst of tragedy. When the fire was finally contained and everyone was taken to the nearby school to shelter, an eerie silence covered our small community. Some sat staring down at their burned shoes, others holding their children, crying. I sat curled up in a folding chair, my clothes still smelling of smoke, my eyes blurry from both worry and exhaustion. In my mind, the image of the red flames licking the sky over Brooklyn kept spinning. We didn't see Mr. Vasquez anywhere. At first, I thought the old man had been taken to the hospital by the fire department. But when Nina returned after her shift, still in shock, she shook her head. "No one's found him, Charlotte. They say he disappeared before the fire broke out." An old landlord, suddenly gone as his house burned down? It was like a puzzle piece was pulled out of the picture, making everything seem suspicious. The rumors spread quickly like the fire that night. One neighbor whispered that he overheard the police saying the building had been sold to some corporation months ago. A name kept coming up, Northgate Development. I had never heard of this name. But within days, the story about Northgate emerged from everywhere. Some said the company specialized in buying old buildings in densely populated neighborhoods, then accidentally causing a fire and afterwards, turning the land into luxury apartments. Others swore they had heard about 2 other fires in Queens and the Bronx, both involving Northgate. I remember sitting with Nina and Walter in the small coffee shop across from the charred building. Nina held her coffee cup, her hands trembling. "If they really did this on purpose, it's like they've disregarded our lives." Walter growled, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "I've taught for nearly 40 years, never thought I'd grow old and end up homeless because of dirty tricks like this. Northgate. Just hearing that name sends shivers down my spine." While everyone was still in turmoil, a new face appeared. He was in his mid-20s, tall and thin with brown hair and glasses, always carrying an old shoulder bag. He walked into the cafe, scanned the room, then approached our table. "Excuse me, I'm Ethan Carter, a reporter from the Brooklyn Daily. I'm following the recent string of house fires. Could you tell me more about what happened?" Nina eyed him suspiciously. "A reporter? We've lost everything. Are you planning to turn our suffering into a hot news story?" Ethan didn't react, silently pulling out a stack of documents and sliding them toward us. "I understand your doubts. But these are 3 fires in the past 2 years, all involving buildings Northgate bought. In Queens, an old building caught fire at midnight. In the Bronx, the fire started in the electrical room. After both, the buildings were leveled to build luxury apartments." I flipped through the papers, trembling. The photos of the ruins from other buildings looked exactly like the scene I had witnessed. "Are you saying our fire wasn't a coincidence?" "I can't say for sure. But the pattern is too similar. And one more thing, Mr. Vasquez. I checked the property records. He sold the building to Northgate 3 months ago. But it seems none of the residents were informed." Walter slammed his hand on the table, spilling coffee. "I've lived there for over 30 years. If he sold it, at least we should have known. This is clearly planned." I remembered the men in suits with clipboards, the back door always left open, the strange incidents happening one after another. Putting it all together, the picture was too clear to be a coincidence. I quietly asked, if what you're saying is true, then our lives, all the families in the building, are obstacles in their money-making plan? The cafe fell into a heavy silence, the sound of spoons tapping lightly on cups. I suddenly remembered my dad's cold eyes when he once said, "Emotions don't pay rent." But if even lives can be weighed and measured, then what's the value of any bill? Ethan opened his laptop, his voice firm. I can't promise anything big. But I will write. I'll dig deeper. If you have any suspicious details, please let me know. Nina bit her lip, her eyes welling up. Walter nodded, his wrinkled hand resting on the stack of papers as if seeking support. I felt a surge of determination within me. This couldn't be an accident. And if Northgate was truly behind it all, I wasn't going to let them bury the truth in the ashes. News of the fire spread faster than the smoke that night. Just 2 days later, while I was still dealing with calls from the Red Cross and relief lists, my parents showed up in New York. They came with my brother Mark without any notice. I met them in the temporary meeting room where we, the residents, were staying. My mom, Linda, was the first to approach, her eyes red. I waited for a hug, a word of concern. But instead she took my hand and whispered, "Charlotte, come home. You can't keep going on like this." My dad, Richard, stood behind her, his face stern, his eyes glowing with that familiar judgment. He crossed his arms over his chest and spoke coldly, "I've told you many times, art doesn't support anyone. Look at you now, you have nothing. This is proof of your foolishness and blindness." I took a step back. The wound hadn't healed yet, and now it was being salted. I hadn't even gotten over the pain of losing my apartment and the memories in it, and now I had to hear the words, "You've failed," from my own father. Mark, as usual, chimed in with a half-joking, half-mocking tone. "I told you, sis. New York's not for dreamers. If you had listened to Dad, taken accounting like I advised, you'd have a stable home, a steady salary by now. You wouldn't be sleeping in a community hall like this." I feeling my chest tighten with suppressed anger. The cramped room seemed to shrink, and these familiar voices pulled me back to a past I had tried to leave behind. I answered, each word as firm as a nail. "I haven't failed. This isn't my fault. This is a conspiracy. The building was sold, hands were involved. I'll prove it." My words froze, all three of them, for a moment. But after that, Dad furrowed his brows and shook his head, his voice becoming even more serious. "Charlotte, you're making excuses. The fire could have been caused by an electrical short, a broken pipe, anything. You're choosing to believe in baseless theories. You're blind. You need to drop all these delusions, go back to Ohio, and start over as a decent person." I laughed bitterly. Decent? In your eyes, decent means giving up my dreams, burying my voice to live the life you choose for me. But if that decency means turning a blind eye to injustice, then I'm sorry, I can't do it. My mom tightened her grip on her sleeve, her worried eyes darting between my dad and me, but she said nothing. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his voice emphasizing each word like he was lecturing. "You're imagining this big conspiracy just to deny the truth. The truth is, you're not strong enough to live here. You should accept it." Not strong enough? Have you ever had to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make rent? Have you ever lived a week on nothing but instant noodles and watered-down coffee? Have you ever taken paintings from one exhibition to the next, being rejected time and time again but still keep going? Do you think strength is only found on the football field? Mark blushed, about to respond, but Dad raised his hand to stop him. "Enough. Charlotte, I didn't come here to argue. I came to bring you home. You've lost everything. You can't keep holding on to something unrealistic." Trying to stay calm. "You're wrong. I haven't lost everything. My paintings are still safe and the truth is still here. You may not believe it, but I know. I've seen those strange men in the building, I've seen how all the incidents have been connected. Northgate Development is behind all of this. It's not a coincidence." My mom put her hand over her mouth and shook her head softly. "Charlotte, what you're saying sounds too terrifying." I turned to my mom, my voice softening. "Mom, I understand. I know you want me to be safe. But what kind of safety is it if people can burn lives just to make money? I can't go back to Ohio, sit in a small house, and pretend nothing happened." Mark scoffed. "You think you can take on a giant real estate corporation? You're just an unknown artist. Who's going to listen to you? You're wrong. I'm not unknown anymore. I have a voice, I have paintings, I have my neighbors with me. And I won't stay silent. Dad sighed, his voice heavy as if hammering down each word. You're so stubborn, Charlotte. You always think you're different, you always have to fight against things. But in the end, you're only hurting yourself. Maybe. But at least if I fall, I'll fall standing tall, not while kneeling. Dad tightened his grip on his briefcase, his gaze darkening. Mom gently touched his hand, but he pulled away, turning his face. Mark bit his lip, not saying another word. I knew I had chosen my own path, and it was driving a deeper wedge between us. But within me, determination surged like hot blood, stronger than the pain. For the week following the fire, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened and the strange signs I had noticed during my time there. While it might have been an accident, I couldn't ignore the things I had sensed. What's more, I grew more certain of my suspicions when I started investigating with Ethan and a few remaining residents. We began to look into the legal status of the building and its transfer process. We dug through public records, and then one late afternoon when I was sitting with Ethan and Walter in a small cafe across from the burned area, Ethan suddenly stopped, his voice filled with astonishment. Charlotte, I found this. It's the demolition permit. The name Northgate Development appeared in bold letters. The permit had been submitted 3 months ago, almost exactly when Mr. Vasquez disappeared. My eyes widened, unable to believe what I was reading. Everything we had suspected suddenly made perfect sense. This is the proof, I said, barely able to breathe. Northgate bought this building. They're planning to demolish it and rebuild. Walter, who had always appeared calm, now looked at me with eyes full of concern. But how can we prove this is a conspiracy? What if it's all a coincidence? I shook my head, unable to accept that coincidence. We have to do something, find more evidence. They've had a plan for a long time. The very next day, Eliza Burke, a representative from Northgate, came to meet us. She came directly to the school where we were temporarily staying. Her face was nothing special, a pricey suit and a fake smile. She had no intention of discussing the building situation or the fire incident. Instead, she started the conversation with an offer that I knew was too good to be true. Hello, I represent Northgate Development. I know this situation is very difficult for you and the company wants to help. We are willing to offer $5,000 to each resident if you agree to sign a waiver of any claims regarding this fire. Eliza's offer felt like a slap in the face. $5,000. A number so small compared to what we had lost, yet it was something my neighbors, those who couldn't afford much, might be tempted to accept. People like the Patel family and Nina had suffered a lot. That amount of money might help them get by for the next few days. Walter looked at me, his eyes full of doubt. Charlotte, sometimes we have to accept the reality. No one has enough strength to fight a corporation like Northgate. I knew his concern came from the reality we were facing, but I couldn't let them do this to us. I couldn't accept such a paltry price in exchange for justice. We don't accept, I said firmly. If you don't want to do right, we will fight. I won't give up. Eliza smiled, her expression unchanged. Up to you, but I just want to remind you that rejecting this offer could cause difficulties for you in the future. There will be many issues if we can't settle this properly. Several others in the building accepted the offer, especially those who were struggling financially. I couldn't blame them. But deep down I knew what I had to do. The fire didn't happen by coincidence. And I wouldn't remain silent. The next day I received a strange phone call. A woman's cold, unfamiliar voice echoed through the receiver. Charlotte Wilson, we want to remind you that continuing this investigation could lead to legal consequences. If you don't stop spreading these unfounded accusations, we won't hesitate to take legal action. I knew this was a threat from Northgate. I hung up, feeling frustrated. I couldn't let them bully us like this. But my anxiety didn't end there. That evening, I returned to my temporary apartment. As I entered the room, a strange feeling washed over me. The window was open with clear signs that someone had been inside. The papers on the table were shuffled and some items were rummaged through. I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. Someone had broken into my apartment. I immediately called the police, but deep down I knew they wouldn't be able to do anything. The feeling of being invaded, watched, was unbearable. But I couldn't go back to Ohio, I couldn't quit like they wanted me to. I had come too far and I couldn't stop now. When I called my dad, his voice was immediately serious. "Charlotte, you have to come home. They can't do anything to you here. You can't fight this alone." "Dad, I'm not giving up. I'm staying and I'll prove it to everyone." Everything became more tense than ever. Even though Dad was worried and didn't understand, I knew this path could only move forward. The truth couldn't be hidden, and I wasn't going to let anyone bury us in silence. On the day of the official exhibition opening, I stood behind the white canvas, admiring the paintings I had poured my heart into. The feeling was indescribable. It was a significant milestone in my artist's life, when finally my paintings were shared with the world. My paintings weren't beautiful in the conventional sense. They weren't still lives or serene landscapes. They reflected the hidden corners of city life. The city I loved, but one that was also full of loneliness, abandonment, and indifference toward people like me. My paintings were images of empty streets, cold concrete blocks, unfamiliar faces staring out of windows, places where no one notices. Suddenly, a man in a black suit, tall and well-built, walked toward me. He smiled faintly, his voice calm. "Charlotte, your paintings are amazing. I'm David Mercer, a representative of Northgate Development. We've noticed you are a talented artist and we'd like to discuss a possible collaboration." Before I could respond, he continued, "We can offer you $5,000 if you agree to sign a waiver concerning the incident in the building. Do you understand?" His offer felt like another slap to the face. How could he say these words in a space filled with reflections of the pain and loss we had just experienced? "I don't need your money," I replied, my voice as cold as ice. "I won't remain silent for money. And I won't sign that waiver you want." He didn't get angry, but instead he smirked. "Then Charlotte, what will you do? Fight a big company like Northgate? Do you think people will stand by you?" Just then I heard the beeping of a phone. One of the attendees had turned back to overhear the conversation. The light from the phone shone on the faces around us. Every word I spoke echoed in the air, and at that moment, I realized I wasn't just an isolated individual. I was becoming a symbol of something greater: the truth. Our conversation immediately spread online. Not the people in the gallery, but also those following on social media began sharing the story about Northgate and their suspicious actions. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I made a decision: I wouldn't stop. I would turn my art into a weapon against injustice. Right after the exhibition, I began preparing for a special project. I didn't want to paint beautiful pictures anymore. I wanted to create something that accurately reflected what I had seen and experienced. I gathered burned materials, rubble from my building, ash from the ruins, and began working on a piece called Vacant Lives. This was a special art collection, where the debris of the building wasn't lifeless objects. Each fragment carried a story, a memory of the people who had lived in that building. Vacant Lives wasn't paintings. It was a sculpture: charred wood pieces, broken windows, peeling paint. Every detail, no matter how small, was tied to the lives that had once lived in that building. The story of Walter, Nina, the Patel family, and myself, all were reimagined through the debris of the building, through each brushstroke I carefully created. When the collection was completed, I decided to host a special exhibition, not just at the Chelsea Gallery, but this time I would expand the space, inviting social organizations and community activists to join. I wanted the world to see that art could reflect social issues, that art could change lives. Once the news of the exhibition was released, social organizations began reaching out to me. They wanted to collaborate, share the story, and help me spread the message about housing justice. Local press quickly picked up the story, and my article appeared in major newspapers. The story about the fire and Northgate schemes was no longer just my story. It had become the story of the entire community. Old neighbors, the ones who had moved away after the fire, now returned. Some even attended the exhibition, sharing their own stories. Each person carried with them a piece of memory, a forgotten life in this city. Slowly, we not only restored the building but also restored what justice was supposed to bring to us. Walking into the exhibition, I felt I was no longer just a lonely girl in this city. I had found another family, not in those of blood, but in the people who stood up for a common cause. We had fought and were still fighting to protect the values we deserved to have. But the fight wasn't over. Even though many social organizations and the press had covered the fire and Northgate, I still felt that it wasn't enough. We needed to do more. We needed to make people see not the paintings but the truth behind them. While I was continuing my work in the studio, suddenly a call from my dad startled me. I had almost forgotten about his presence after all the arguments and opposition from him. But this time his voice wasn't cold like before. There was something in his voice that made me listen more closely. "Charlotte, can you hear me?" He hesitated. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked, unable to hide my doubt in my voice. "My dad found some things about Northgate. And you were right. They're involved in bribing officials for inspections. The documents about the inspections, the audit reports, all show signs of misconduct." I couldn't believe what he was saying, but my dad's words, always driven by practicality and fairness, made me believe we had stumbled onto something much bigger than we had imagined. "What did you find?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "There are copies of financial transactions. They bribed the building inspectors to overlook major faults. Haven't you heard the story about selling old buildings, demolishing them to build new high-rises?" He said, his tone steady but certain. Pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. The fires in other areas, the abandoned apartments, the questions I had always had in my mind were now beginning to make sense. "You know what to do now, don't you?" My dad's voice grew serious, filled with determination. "I can't let them get away with this." "I won't stop," I replied immediately without hesitation. "Exactly. But this time you're going to need help from someone who can truly help you uncover the truth, truly uncover it." "I will help you. There's nothing left to hide." The next day my dad and I sat down together, going over every detail in the documents he had found. A collaboration I never thought would happen between me, an artist, and him, an accountant. But it was the combination of these two seemingly opposing worlds that opened up the opportunity to break through the power walls that Northgate had built. My dad used his excellent financial analysis skills to uncover the hidden clues in the contracts and transactions. While I continued painting, creating works that reflected the truth about what had happened, he dug deeper into the financial records, finding key points we could use to prove Northgate's criminal activity. We didn't stop there. At the same time, an important source reached out to me, Tanya, a former Northgate employee. She had left the company because she couldn't stand the tactics they were using on residents and old buildings. Tanya provided me with some internal emails, which included clear directives about the accelerated vacancy campaign, a strategy to destroy buildings and turn them into luxury development sites. These emails contained details of meetings, internal discussions on how to force residents to leave. We now had enough evidence to take action. After gathering the documents from Tanya, I reached out to Josephine Alvarez, a lawyer specializing in residents' rights, who had supported us in collecting evidence and building our case. Josephine was very cautious when approaching this case, reminding me that it wouldn't be easy to prove the criminal behavior of a large corporation like Northgate, but we had enough evidence to start an investigation. However, as things were starting to take shape, the prosecutor officially got involved. A criminal investigation was opened, and I knew that now everything had escalated beyond our control. Northgate was not a real estate company. They were an empire with deep political connections. But the truth, no matter how well hidden, would eventually be exposed. In the days that followed, news of the prosecutor's investigation began to spread. The media started covering it, and the movement for justice for Northgate's building residents began to gain momentum. The people from the affected areas found their voices. We, the hurt ones, now had a unified voice. But, as always, the closer we got to our goal, the greater the pressure became. Northgate's lawyers began contacting me, sending threatening letters demanding I stop the investigation. They made threatening statements, even calling me a saboteur, damaging the community's interests. But I didn't stop. My dad, though he didn't fully understand what I was doing, began standing by my side. He gradually realized that what I was doing wasn't against the family or against his values, but standing up for what was right, for justice. A year had passed since the fire destroyed not only the house I loved but also became the beginning of my fight. After months of persistent struggle, justice was finally restored. The evidence my dad, the community, and I had gathered was strong enough to bring the case to court. Northgate, the company that had been behind the fires and the accelerated vacancy strategy, finally had to face consequences they couldn't deny. The leaders of Northgate were arrested and investigated for corruption, bribery, and intentionally destroying property for unlawful profit. The company's stock plummeted, board members were heavily criticized, and the media began exposing the truth about their shady actions over the years. The residents of the buildings affected by Northgate, including myself, were finally compensated. Not only money, but more importantly, the government decided to use part of the compensation fund to rebuild a new affordable housing area, a place where families could truly find a home. This wasn't a building, it was the rebirth of a community, a new hope for those who had been left behind. My life after the fire also entered a new chapter. My exhibition didn't stop in New York, but spread across the country. Each painting of mine, works born from pain and defiance, was now recognized as art. I became a famous artist, invited to participate in seminars, art organizations, and even discussions about social injustice. People in the art world began to see me as a pioneer, not only in art but also in using art as a tool for fighting for justice. But in all these changes, what I cherished most was the relationship with my dad. After all these years of confrontation, after endless arguments, I had finally found him again. For the first time in my life, I felt the understanding and support from the man I once thought I would never find empathy in. My dad, Richard, the one who always valued practicality, the one who once tried to pull me back to Ohio, had now changed. He had stopped criticizing me for my art career and had started taking pride in what I had achieved. He stopped looking at me with disappointment and instead saw me with the eyes of a father who had recognized the strength and determination in his daughter. We attended meetings together, worked with organizations, and even he helped me investigate financial details in the cases I was pursuing. This not only made our relationship stronger but also created a connection between art and finance, between creativity and reason, that I never thought would exist between him and me. One afternoon, when my dad and I stood in front of the new building where our community would start over, he looked at me, his eyes filled with pride. Though he didn't say it, I knew he understood. He had come to understand that sometimes, standing up for what's right isn't an easy decision, but it is the right one. In my heart, a sense of peace rose. Everything around us had changed, but what was truly important had remained the same. I turned to look at my dad, my eyes shining as I said, "The fire took our home, but it gave me the truth, and a family I thought I had lost." My dad didn't respond immediately. He remained silent, as if reflecting on every word I had just said. Then finally he gently placed his hand on my shoulder, his voice soft. "You've become stronger than I ever imagined. I'm very proud of you." What we had gone through had created a connection stronger than anything I could have imagined before. I turned to look at those around me, the ones who had become my second family throughout this journey. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't alone anymore. Although I couldn't change the past, I knew that every step on this path would bring me closer to my goal. Not for myself, but for all the people who fought with me, those who never gave up hope even when the fire burned everything. As we remained there, under the still evening sky, I suddenly realized that life always has its own way of rebirthing. The pain, the loss, and the challenges that seemed insurmountable were, in fact, the driving force that made us stronger, helping us rediscover the valuable things we only realize when we lose them. The fire may have consumed our house, but it gave me the truth, the understanding of myself and my family. Fear no longer held us, and we faced difficulty without backing down. And it was this connection, between me, my dad, and the neighbors who fought alongside me, that created a community stronger than ever. So what about you? Have you ever faced a challenge that seemed impossible to overcome? Or have there been moments in your life that made you realize the truly important values you had forgotten? Share your thoughts with me in the comments below. I would love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next inspiring and profound stories. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Together, we will continue to seek stories of resilience, courage, and love in life.